All you are in place in this present hall and also those online, so all welcome. So we have a wonderful day of 3 major events celebrating ethnomusicology, Japanese studies of culture and music, and the legacy of Professor William Malm too. So I'm the MC, and quickly I want to introduce our first speaker to do a greeting, and she's Professor Dennis St. Arnold, the director of the Center for Japanese Studies and Professor of Nurse. And she's very important because her first OK for the budget is what makes this happen.
In the spotlight. I've never done it before. Hi everybody. I am a professor of nursing, but I'm also an anthropologist, so I'll be speaking to you today as an anthropologist. So first I want to welcome you on behalf of the Center for Japanese Studies, where Dr. Malm had his home for over 34 years. But I'm going to speak to you as an interdisciplinary anthropologist, actually. My field is medical anthropology. And I'm reflecting on his pioneering work in establishing the field of ethnomusicology and also helping develop the program, this program. He was the first to write comprehensively about Japanese music in English, and of course he mentored generations of scholars in ethnomusicology. This field of ethnomusicology is so central to researchers like myself. We rely on these interdisciplinary scholars to help illuminate some of the hidden facets of culture. And we also know that music is part of the complex mosaic that helps people express their selfhood and engage in community, and also how they connect with the divine and with nature. During the year of preparations for this event, my encounters with his friends, his family, and colleagues has taught me another aspect, though, of Dr. Malm's legacy, which, despite his amazing works, is more about his spirit. So we know that he had a very exuberant spirit. He was extremely curious, he was passionate, he was enthusiastic, and he was very playful, and also very patient. The performances and lectures that we're going to see today into the evening embody this spirit of curiosity and passion. His enduring legacy makes us want to learn aspects of culture, and that's something that a wonderful teacher would credit as their crowning achievement. And I believe that he would have thought that that was his biggest gift. So with that, I say thank you for coming, and thank you, Dr. Malm.
Second person to give our greeting is actually needs no introduction. He's our beloved and much respected Professor Lester Malm, third professor, and we all know he was the senior vice provost too. And I must say that he was the one that made a lot of cultural activities happen in his time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lamb. I'm going to expound just a bit on Bill Malm's relationship with me, my relationship with him. And just basically say that the scholarly contributions of William P. Malm significantly influenced my academic journey in the field of ethnomusicology. As a curious graduate student in the mid-1970s, I was introduced to his book, Music Cultures of the Pacific, the Near East, and Asia. This, along with Bruno Nettles' Folk and traditional musics of the Western continents became the cornerstone of my first graduate level course in world music. Again, in preparing for my doctoral preliminary exams, which required a knowledge of music and some other field outside one's major, I chose to focus on Japanese music. Again, I encountered Bill's work, specifically his authoritative book, Japanese Music and Musical Instruments. Those of you who have experienced the doctoral exam process know how challenging and emotionally taxing it can be. I spent countless hours delving into Bill's outstanding text, preparing myself to answer questions about bunraku, no drama, kabuki, shakuhachi, shamisen, and so forth. However, to my surprise, the exam did not include one single question on Japanese music. When I shared this with Bill, he responded in his characteristic subtle manner by saying, "Perhaps the committee didn't know what to ask you." He was right. I served on the music faculty and administration at the University of California, Santa Barbara for 14 years, along with my two esteemed colleagues, Joseph Lamb and Amy Steelman. We were all there together. How we wound up here in Michigan. In the early 1990s, I was nominated for a vice provost position here in Michigan. It was a difficult decision to leave the blue skies and warm weather of Santa Barbara. However, in addition to the Michigan administrative role, I was appointed a professor in the Department of Musicology here at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And my immediate colleagues were two of the field's most celebrated ethnomusicologists, Bill Malm and Judith Becker. When I arrived, I learned that Bill was in the process of retiring, but his retirement aside, we became really great friends. My relationship with Bill transcended professional boundaries when I became a member of the Scientific Club, which is a scholarly and social dining club that dates back to the 1870s here on campus. Bill was a longtime member, and we often traveled together to the monthly meetings. Our conversations during that time were much different from before. I learned more about his life in the military, as a dance pianist, his travels in Japan, and of course, the history, care, and treatment of the musical instruments in the Stearns collection. These are not just informative sessions, but wonderful times that I cherish. Bill was also a part of a group of senior ethnomusicologists who established graduate level degree programs at major universities in the 1960s. Under his innovative leadership and scholarship, the University of Michigan became one of the few centers of graduate study in ethnomusicology during that time. This advancement helped propel Michigan graduates into prominent roles in the field of ethnomusicology, teaching and research. The Society for Ethnomusicology's highest honor bestowed on a member is being asked to present the Charles Seeger Lecture at its annual meetings. Bill and three of his former students presented this lecture. Judith Becker from here at Michigan, Kay Chalamet from Harvard, and Mark Slobin at Wesleyan University. This is a record unmatched by any member of Bill's generation. Bill's work went beyond the ordinary, offering a fresh new look at the aesthetic and social context of world music. His contributions were not just recognized nationally, but internationally, as evidenced by the prestigious Order of the Rising Sun Award received from the Japanese government. 15 years ago, it was my pleasure to collaborate with the Center for Japanese Studies to inaugurate the William P. Malm Prize. This award, along with the gift endowment from his wife, Yuta Gerber Malm, strengthens the enduring legacy of my great friend and colleague, William P. Malm. Thank you.
So it's time for me to introduce our distinguished lecturer for today. She is Professor Christine Yano, Professor Emeritus of University of Hawaii and Manoa. Chris Yano, as later you'll find out she's a wonderful scholar, anthropologist, I would say ethnomusicologist too, but she has written many fascinating books and papers, and she's known all through as a wonderful speaker. And just to make sure that you know how prolific and how influential his work is, I just read the title, that's why I have to read it so that I don't mess it up. So the first one is Tears of Longing, Nostalgia and the Nation in Japanese Popular Music by Harvard, 2002. That's a wonderful book, and she always has wonderful titles. The second one is Crowning the Nice Girl, Gender, Ethnicity and Culture in Hawaii's Cherry Blossom Festival. That's 2006. And 5 years later, she has another book, Airborne Dreams, Nisei, Still With Us, and Pan American World Airways. That's from Duke. And then another 2 years later, she has another one, Pink Globalization, Hello Kitty and its Trek Across the Pacific. Now that's an amazing book because every time you go to TJ Maxx and see any kitty, Hello Kitty things, you know there's a scholarship behind that. That's by Chris Yano. Yeah? And she has retired a couple of years from Hawaii, but she's still working on 2 books. One is more on the global, the Pan Am Airlines, and then the other is, I know, is shaping up on one of the very important publishers between Japan and Asia and America, the Charles Tuttle publishers. So we are going to hear a lot more from Chris Yano. So before, I should not say any more, so let's welcome Professor William.
I am so honored to be here. Can everybody hear me? And is the mic on properly? It's okay. Good. Thank you. I mean, you know, I know that if Malm were here, he would have said, please take the most expensive seats at the front. But it's okay, you can stay where you are. I mean, he was, as many people know, he was always himself. And I appreciated the comments of introduction because I think it builds personal relationship with many here in this audience that brings you here. And that's partly what I'd like to talk about. So let me get started. And I called this in honor of Professor William P. Malm, Listening as Global Music Encounter. Of course, I'm talking here about ethnomusicology, but it can also refer to our experiences of the day, listening, having a global music encounter, thanks to the many esteemed performers who are here for this event. Thank you. And I ask in this, what does it mean to encounter one another through relatively unfamiliar musics? How do power dynamics between individuals, institutions, regions, cultures frame this encounter? And what are the contexts for the encounter? As an anthropologist, I'm always interested in context. And what are its numerous aftermaths? And maybe, most importantly, how do we center global musical encounters upon listening as a meeting ground of the ear and, especially according to Bill Malm, the heart? So I'm taking Professor William Malm's career as kicked off by his 1959 milestone book, Traditional Japanese Music and Musical Instruments, published by Charles E. Tuttle Company, as a kind of historical touchstone that allows us to consider various framings of the global musical encounter. This book, written while he was a graduate student, you graduate students who are here, think of that, a graduate student, and it wasn't even his PhD work. In his 4th month of PhD fieldwork in Japan, before he could really speak Japanese fluently, before he learned any Japanese music instrument or genre really well. And this book of his had the audacity to become a classic. In its audacity, Malm's book introduced the English-speaking world to various forms of Japanese music and its instruments, and remains on the global book market trade from 1959 until 1993. In fact, it is still taught in many ethnomusicology classrooms. So what I'm trying to do today is ask, what can we still learn from Malm's 1959 blockbuster tome? And what kind of cross-cultural encounter has it been, and maybe continues to be? And what is the nature of such global music encounters then and now? So in the introduction to his 2000 updated version of the book, published by King Kodansha, Malm says he wrote it, this is a quote, "with innocence and youthful enthusiasm." So what is the role of innocence, the role of youth, of what I'll call the naive encounter, maybe the improvisational encounter, flying by the seat of your pants, maybe the creative encounter, maybe even the colonial or post-colonial encounter between musical systems and new audiences. But let me turn first, as the previous speakers today have done, to a personal story. So I first encountered Malm while an undergraduate music major at the University of Michigan from 1977 to 79, and I took an introductory ethnomusicology course. I was not a typical undergraduate. I had already earned a bachelor's degree in film from Stanford University, but I was there in Ann Arbor with my then boyfriend, sampling courses toward a music degree. I wasn't a very serious student. Malm was not a typical professor either. He seemed to step into the classroom from a different era, at least in my eyes. He was tall, always standing erectly, although not stiffly. He had he came of ruddy Scandinavian stock. And maybe these are my Hawaiʻi eyes looking at him and saying, he looks like a Scandinavian, gentlemanly, but with a twinkle in his eye. So in the classroom, he was old-fashioned show business, always dressed impeccably, hair always well kept, in a side-parted style on your programs. That never changed, it seemed. He wore a tweed jacket and tie every class period, white shirt pressed, keeping calculated rein on his boundless energy. He spoke quickly and with great enthusiasm, sometimes tripping over his own words. He was a storyteller who wove tales of music around the world in bits and snippets that constituted the introduction to ethnomusicology. And he was a quipping sage, peppering his lectures with aphorisms. The one I still remember, Japanese music utilizes a minimum amount of material to maximum effect. Do you remember it? Do you remember that one? Okay. These and other sayings became Malm-isms, those exotic sounds of the world made legible through these kinds of quips. So Malm guided us through the semester with a slim 169-page Prentice Hall textbook that was mentioned, his own, Music Cultures of the Pacific, Near East, and Asia, published in 1967, accompanied by slideshows, personal stories, many music examples. His enthusiasm was utterly infectious. And it would have been disrespectful not to respond with equal enthusiasm, dutifully adjacent wonderment. He told us that each lecture, and this is part of it, this is the showmanship, he told us that each lecture was timed to 50 minutes, and he never went over or under, not even by a minute. It was part of his showmanship. Each lecture was thus doled out like a well-planned meal. Appetizer, main course, dessert. Not too much, not too little. This was meant to leave us eager for the next lecture's installment. Over the course of the semester, we received our kind doses of musical exotica. each one filled with awe, his, and eventually ours, both in terms of the sounds as well as the ideas behind the sounds. So this was what was meant by understanding the world through its music, imbibed through ears and hearts. During the summer, he offered a small course in festival music in Matsuri-gayashi, and there he taught us how to swing, Japanese style, beginning with mnemonics that I still cannot erase from my ears. And those of you who know it, who know Matsuri-gayashi, ten, 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 ten. I can also see him still in the small classroom in Bell Tower, leading students, swaying his head to the beat. And over the course of my time at Michigan, Malm offered to drive students to a meeting of the Society for Ethnomusicology to be held in Bloomington, Indiana. And I was thrilled to pack into his car with a number of other students, and off we went to my first professional meeting. And none of us were presenting, we just went to attend, right? Behind the wheel, Malm became Wild Bill. Not necessarily for the speed at which he drove, although I can't vouch for that, but for the spirit of adventure that he imparted. And driving from Ann Arbor to Bloomington was a, quote, adventure in the best sense of the word. We were being invited to join in a brand new experience led by a master at new experiences. We were agog to see big names in the field, Bruno Nettle. For me, the biggest thrill was listening to anthropologist Alan Merriam deliver a lecture. No slides, no musical examples, only typewritten sheets from which he read, and those words that he read leaked off the page straight to my own thoughts. He was inspiring as what I considered a true anthropologist of music. And shortly after, in 1980, Merriam tragically died in a plane crash in Poland. And had it not been for Malm's generous offer to drive us to Bloomington, I would never have seen Merriam speak. And that memory really resonates with me. After I returned to Hawaii and earned graduate degrees in anthropology and eventually got a job, Malm would come to visit his daughter, Elena, as well as to occasionally teach at the University of Hawaii. And I would see him there, reconnecting with him over Korean food at Manoa Marketplace. Over the years, he seemed, in some ways, strangely, always the same, ageless, still always standing upright, his enthusiasm intact, the proof of his own indomitable spirit, as well as the attractions of the musics that he relished, from jazz to nagauta to gamelan. So why do I begin with a story of my own personal encounter with Malm? And as I explain further, because I believe my undergraduate student encounter with him characterized many aspects of the man and scholar that defined his version of the global music encounter. First, enthusiasm. Malm loved the exotic musics he encountered. He was quick to share his enthusiasm. Second, adventure. By his own personality, Malm was someone who loved adventure. Maybe call it a novelty-seeking gene, I don't know. He sought out the new and found it sonically in the global music encounter. Third, accessibility. Malm made sure that the exotic musics could be made accessible to others, like myself. It was part of his unbridled enthusiasm through which he assumed most musics could be made knowable or at least appreciable to others, including himself. And fourth, showmanship. Malm loved the stage, and the stage loved him. He was comfortable at the podium, in front of audiences large and small, and with captive audiences, he could gild the lily of the global musical encounter with all the gloss that he could muster. Shy? No, never. Audacious? Sometimes. Humble? Yes, in essence, but not without the performer's dopamine. So students could sense all of the above and accepted such a presence with a certain kind of glee. After all, Malm made the global encounter fun. Let me turn briefly back to the period during which Malm wrote his first book. So here's what he writes in the preface to the new edition in 2000, because he looks back upon the process of writing that book. He says this: "My wife and I were having dinner with Donald Ritchie, January 9th, 1956. Late in the meal, he mentioned that Meredith Weatherby of Charles E. Tuttle Company wanted to know if I was interested in writing a book on Japanese music. The fact that I was a graduate student, age 28, who had only been in Japan 4 months and that I'd never published anything and did not seem to be a problem. Rather, the challenge seemed to be that, among all the books on Japanese flower arranging, tea ceremony, judo, sumo, cooking, and theater, there was almost nothing on music. So, in February of 1956, I began writing. My innocence and youthful enthusiasm were such that I turned in the draft in July 1957. Weatherby told me it was the first time in his career that he had ever gotten a manuscript on time." So this encounter says as much about young Malm as it does about the young field of Japan studies in English and the company Charles E. Tuttle Company and its relationship to the larger publishing world. The American occupation of Japan from 1945 to April of 1952 had just ended, and leaving in its wake a host of young, white, male students of Japan from America, such as journalist and film critic Donald Ritchie, literature specialist Donald Keene, historian Edwin Reischauer, and interestingly, the University of Michigan Center for Japanese Studies played a role in this regard. So the Okayama Field Station, part of the University of Michigan, was set up from 1950 to 1955. So hosting American scholars and their students to conduct fieldwork in 3 villages. The results were monographs of rural Japan from some of the earliest American researchers, anthropologist Richard Beardsley, who was here at CJS, geographer Robert Hall, political scientist Robert Ward on Japan. So whereas Malm's 1959 book was written for a general audience, eager to learn more about the newly defeated country of Japan, perhaps about Asia in general, the fact-filled monographs that emerged from that period focused on scientific study of rural communities in a foreign land. So like much of anthropology at that time, the mark of an ethnography was its attention to the rather dry, sober details of everyday life, from farming to educating young families to kinship systems. And what those early ethnographers did not necessarily capture were the colorful parties of after-hours socializing, the music and dance that marked the seasons, or the theatrical forms that told epic tales of sorrow. This is where Malm's work filled a scholarly and emotional gap. But keep in mind, his book was really of a different genre, an aim from other scholarly writings. The Michigan ethnographers wrote for themselves. That is, other scholars intent upon establishing the field of Japanese studies at places like University of Michigan. Malm wrote by design for the general public. Charles E. Tuttle, his publisher, was in the business of introducing the colorful arts from literature to martial arts. In short, digestible bites that would introduce the world to this latest exotic capture, Japan. So, founded in 1948 by Charles Tuttle, Tuttle Books became the attractive, portable, English language introduction to Japan, and eventually he extended that to other parts of Asia and the Pacific. I'm sure that several people in this audience, I'm looking around, may find Tuttle books on their bookshelf. It's like scratch a Japan researcher and you'll find a Tuttle book, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, right? And I looked at my bookshelf. It had Glimpses of Unfamiliar Japan by Lafcadio Hearn, Everyday Life in Traditional Japan by Charles Dunn, 47 Romance Story Retold by John Allen, all in small, portable form. The size was important, right? So other well-known title publications include Bushido, The Soul of Japan by Inazo Nitobe, Chanryu, The Japanese Tea Ceremony by A.L. Sadler, Chrysanthemum and the Sword by Ruth Benedict. So these books, with their characteristic trademark symbol of a bridge, which still is there, look in your title books, you'll see it, the bridge, and their curious publication cities of Rutland, Vermont, and Tokyo, Japan, fill bookshelves, fill minds of readers. Tuttle's Japan, as I will call this, lives as an antiquated land of cherry blossoms and tea ceremony. In Malm's hands, as well, plucked koto, strummed shamisen sounds. So Charles Tuttle himself, excuse me if I go a little bit off from Malm and on to Charles Tuttle. Charles Tuttle himself grew up in Vermont, a son from a publishing family who traveled by himself to Japan as part of the American occupation forces, ended up marrying a Japanese woman, Reiko Chiba. Given his family background, he established his own small publishing firm with the mission to publish, quote, books to span the East and West. And if you look at the website now, it says 1 page at a time. It's very specific. It was, in fact, the path that he himself, Charles Tuttle, that is, had traveled. Rutland, Vermont, Tokyo, Japan, imprint, made biographical and business sense. So Malm, signing on with Tuttle, meant that the template for this book was set, a book to span the East and West, written in an easy-to-read and accompanied by many photos. The genre suited Malm well. It was kind of show business between covers, right? He was an adventurer who had contracted with a company founded upon the adventurer spirit of the post-war Pacific, bridging East and West. So too was the Tuttle editor, Weatherby, an adventurer, taking on such a neophyte with no track record, but upon the whim of a recommendation from the network of Americans in Japan at the time. So it was a network thing, right? It was an era of makeshift networks, catch as catch can, frontier in this burgeoning American empire that assumed the kind of credibility. So American to American, class elite to class elite, white male to white male, even with some ties to the US military. These were sufficient, what I'll call handshake credentials. These men, from Malm to Ritchie to Weatherby to Charles Tuttle himself, welcomed the spirit of adventure in their newly adopted home of Japan. They were treated well, tall victors in a global hierarchy, framed by the ashes of World War II. And I mentioned tall just because there is a very famous, infamous photo of MacArthur, General MacArthur, the head of the occupation forces, with Emperor Hirohito. And the very first thing that everybody would notice is the difference in their bodies. So MacArthur, tall, I don't know how exactly tall he was, probably over 6 feet, and Hirohito, I don't know how small Hirohito was, but certainly way smaller. And I mentioned adventure as part of an era not only for resident Americans, but also in starkly different ways for Japanese themselves, finding their way in a new global order after the official end of the American occupation in 1952. The adventure for Japanese was always mixed, acknowledging the powerful seductions of US popular culture, from television shows to sports to fashion to music, while maintaining a space for Japan's own pre-modern popular culture. So American popular culture had been a part of Japan's mediascape even before the war, but it was banned, officially banned, during the war, including enemy musics that included ukulele and jazz. So one of the pop music highlights of the American occupation period was lifting the ban and thus opening the floodgates for American-based pop genres. The sonic background of this Japanese adventure was as filled with discordant clashes amid the giddiness of the kind of post-war appetites for the sounds of what I'll call America. So the government helped secure a place for traditional arts in Japan. So under the 1950 law for protection of cultural properties, intangible cultural properties were defined as dramatic, musical, artistic, other intangible cultural artifacts of high value in terms of Japanese history or art. So that had been secured by the Japanese government itself in 1950. So intangible cultural properties became status as a sound of Japan's past, still alive in niche form in the present. This was music as cultural ambassador, performed for audiences, including foreigners, as the official sound of Japan, and Malm's 1959 book reflected this. His book, too, served as what I'm calling a cultural ambassador. Like all title books, a bridge between East and West, in this case, given the longevity of the book and its impact on ethnomusicology and interface that took on a life of its own. Now let me turn briefly to Malm, the individual, in order to address the role of personality in shaping the historical course of cultural ambassadors and the bridges we build and traverse in their making. And in order to help me flesh out this section of my talk, I enlisted the help of one of Malm's daughters, Elena, who has lived in Hawaii for a number of years, teaching English as a second language at KCC, a community college in Honolulu, and she was full of stories. She began and ended with one of her father's favorite sayings, quote, "You can never tell on an adventure." And do I see some nods? By that, I asked her, because I wasn't exactly sure what it meant. By that, Malm meant that life is full of surprises and opportunities, and one can never tell when and how something, somewhere, will become an adventure. And what is important is the spirit of adventure, that is seeking it, being open to it, even hungering for it, maybe framing it as an adventure, letting it happen. There are many infrastructural aspects to Malm's adage that frame his, quote, adventures in Japanese music. First, there's the appetite for the new, the novelty-seeking aspect, the novelty-seeking gene, perhaps. It's a spirit of improvisation in life that makes some people jump at the chance to experience something new, and Malm did that. Elena recalls that he was a pianist and clarinetist by training, and shortly after graduating from college, he had the opportunity to tour with an American-based gamelan troupe. He knew nothing about gamelan music, the way he didn't know that much about Japanese music in the field. He knew nothing about gamelan music, but his innate curiosity and sense of adventure made him jump at the opportunity, learning as much and as quickly as he could. In the gamelan ensemble, he was accepted. In the gamelan ensemble on tour, he became Mas Malam, off on an adventure. So second is hard work. You don't do this without hard work. Enabled by a kind of boundless energy, Malm worked hard, long, quickly. It was what allowed Mas Malam to tour with the gamelan troupe. It is what allowed him to finish his classic textbook for title in 1 year. He approached hard work as another adventure, perhaps, a mountain to be climbed with this kind of eagerness, with a kind of abandon. Third is a can-do spirit that makes of Malm an intrepid adventurer, assisted by a certain amount of charm, certainly by confidence. He was willing to try new things with abandon. You might chalk this up to a certain machismo, but in thinking through this man at this time, his daughter agrees that his was a kind of what could be termed soft masculinity, perhaps, sensitive, eager in his approach to the world. So it was not Malm the conqueror, but Malm the musical explorer, eager to learn the different instruments, musical scales, and rhythms. And last but not least, element of the infrastructure adventure is passion. Malm exuded passion, and I think we've heard it maybe in terms of the word exuberance, right? Moved through the world with passion, wrote with passion of Japan's music and musical instruments. Passion is what made Malm such an effective communicator about Japan, imparting his passion for the country, its traditional music and instruments, along with inspiring those around him. One American shakuhachi player I spoke with says with great reverence and affection that Malm inspired his entire musical career. He inspired those around him by sheer dint of his passion for this newly adopted musical culture. Elena recounts her father exclaiming, "I'm so lucky. I found something I love so much, I never had to work a day in my life." Maybe you've heard this too. For Malm, who by his own playful assessment never had to work a day in his life, but in fact worked harder than mere mortals around him, Japan, its traditional music and instruments were all of a piece. It was all passion, all play, all adventure. So these things, these elements, passion, play, adventure, these define Malm's experience of Japanese traditional music, and more importantly, his subsequent role in communicating that trifecta of the global encounter in his 1959 book and subsequent teaching and learning. I ask again, what is the role of the naive encounter, the improvisational encounter, the creative encounter, and even the colonial encounter between musical systems and new audiences? So let me bring back the concept of cultural ambassador, as it may be useful for us. It's a term that has been used informally to refer to people, things, genres of performance that travel with positive effect. It is increasingly being used more formally as a job description, as I found when I Googled it. Here's one job description from 2025. It says, Wikipedia says this: "A good cultural ambassador is passionate about promoting understanding and appreciation for their represented culture. They should be open-minded, adaptable, and respect diversity, excellent communication, interpersonal skills, ability to engage various audiences are essential." End quote. Frankly, this describes Malm to a T. The passion, the promotional skills, the appreciation of Japanese culture, the open-mindedness and adaptability, the excellent communication and interpersonal skills. Clearly, these qualities make Malm, as cultural ambassador, an important figure. At least in the 1950s, his was the naive encounter, and he could communicate his naive enthusiasm with great sincerity. It was an improvisational encounter that drew upon his skills to play the foreigner in Japan. I've hyphenated those three words. Foreigner in Japan, minute by minute, gain access to traditional musical cultures there. And this was a creative encounter by which he used his Western talents to grasp a new cultural musical system for him. Whether through the mnemonics of Matsuri Bayashi or the Hayashi of Nagaruta. Like the gamelan parts he learned before it, these were sonic puzzles to be unraveled and made legible, even performable. His creativity lay in making that legibility accessible to others not familiar with Japanese music making. And the processes he lay bare are familiar to ethnomusicologists, learning the basics of foreign sound systems by the encounter. It was predicated upon the knowability of music cultures rather than on their exotic opaqueness. And I propose that we consider our numerous global musical encounters then and now, including perhaps tonight's concert, as a juxtaposition of personalities, of institutions, of sound systems, of aesthetic hierarchies, and affective frameworks. So we are a jumble of differences striving for some kind of tenuous legibility, some way of, quote, getting it, of understanding what is going on. And here is where Malm and other cultural ambassadors, including Tuttle Books including National Living Treasure designations, even Okayama ethnographies, assist and even inspire, to greater or lesser degree, the untutored, first as an introduction to the bridge, and then as facilitators in its crossing. Along the way, Japan itself may be far too much of a hurdle in knowing. Rather, there can be the Japan of sound bites. Small, digestible bits of knowing as facilitated and guided by cultural ambassadors such as Malm and his book. With the whisk of matcha served to the sounds of the plot goto, this is Japan as translation. And lastly, let us zoom forward to our current era that pays a lot of attention, necessarily so, to both the message and the politics of the messenger. And I suggest we consider the contrastive dialogic role of the indigenous performer, the home audience, the knowing listener, as our necessary next step interlocutors. In the process of considering these historicized musical meeting grounds, how do we embrace new and critical possibilities of global musical encounters? Introductions by way of Malm are fine, are necessary, especially as they inspire further study and commitment to the encounter. But in the best of worlds, we might search out a global musical bridge that goes beyond Malm, introductions aside, to a meeting ground that frames the surface encounter historically, maybe even critically. So I am suggesting critical listenership as a kind of global responsibility. And so let me go further and suggest critical listening that engages dialogically with not only different cultures, but also different time periods and contexts. These contexts include the histories of musical instrument songs and their travels. They include political economic systems that affect how we listen and what we hear. They include sometimes histories of violence, of cultural suppression or appropriation. They include hierarchies of taste that outline assertions of social class, gender divisions and exclusions, outcasts and their roles in developing musical cultures, and global systems of movement and distribution. They include creative prompts that help develop underclass sonic expressions, whether it's sorrow, lament, unbridled joy, or poignancy. And they include tears of longing that hang on universal emotions, hearts broken, long-awaited reunions, family ties, both cruel and comforting. In this rich melodrama of emotion and sound, past and presence coexist as part of the slurry of the future. In many ways, this is the richness that Malm first offered. Not the complexities of critical listenership, but the wayward seductions that might exist if we listened long and hard and with respect for personal, family, and cultural histories that form the ongoing dynamic framework of the global music encounter. The global musical encounter of the 1950s may easily have ended with the introduction, glossy photos, and enthusiastic prose of Malm's book. But Malm invited us to listen with our ears and hearts, and in order to do so in 2025, we have to go beyond his intro. For one thing, the divide between the exotics and us is no longer possible and no longer impenetrable. Rather, knowing interlocutors, musicians, scholars, etc., mingle on both sides of the divide. And in an idealized global encounter, they may have conversations with each other, even perform together. They may share histories and personal stories that enrich any listening of musics. And those histories may include colonial relationships, cultural violence, each of which impart a differently tinged frame to any musical note. And surpassing the crossing of divides lies the ethics of listening beyond Malm's intro. In other words, we recognize the historical naivete of the divide itself, as well as the ethical imperative to listen beyond. The music that results is not merely an aesthetic phenomenon, but also a socio-historical one. It gives voice to the hierarchies and politics beyond its making, as well as the histories that bring the notes to their present moment and audiences. I'm suggesting constant, ghostly presences, so swirling winds of memories, of individual and collectives that lend their social weight to the global musical encounter of 2025. This is far more than encoding and decoding, but layered recodings, drawing out the complex ironies and sympathetic vibrations of tales more than thrice told. So we embrace here the global music encounter, even as we acknowledge that music is not a universal language. It never was. But there's a certain kind of universality that generates those sounds, and that might recognize in these sounds the resonance of human lives. The vibrational pathway to listening thus lies in this kind of sonic empathy, which gives us expansive possibilities of knowing, as well as multiple modes of understanding. So empathy allows us to inhabit joys, sorrows, bitterness, even as expressed in languages of song and movement that we do not formally know. We listen, we learn, we breathe, and we wait. Ethnomusicology builds upon such arts of listening that Malm knew well. Granted, we have gone way past Malm in these concluding thoughts, but we also owe it to him for getting us to the starting line, for opening the door into the previously unknown, at least for an outside group of listeners. We refresh ourselves to partaking of his naive and enthusiastic early encounter, but our palate has grown through successive encounters. With home performers, newly configured audiences, and growing bodies of knowing listeners in Japan, in diasporic Japans, and new old homes such as Ann Arbor. Our concert tonight is made richer by this body of interlocutors, whether or not they are present in this auditorium. In 2025, they may hold little capacity for post-war naivete of things Japanese, but we can cling to the spirit of adventure, even discovery, as an ongoing guide to listening. In this, Malm was master. As he liked to say, you can never tell on an adventure. So I'm inviting us all to partake of tonight's concert with a deep indebtedness to our chief adventurer, Professor William Malm. And let me just add a little postscript, which is, I'm going to be attending the American Anthropological Association meetings in New Orleans in November. And it's interesting that the theme of this is ghosts and hauntings. And this is, let me just read from that call for papers, because I think it has something to do with perhaps how we might listen tonight, today and tonight. It says this: we welcome our, this is the AAA talking, so with apologies. We welcome our colleagues to embrace the creative potential of the ghostly and the spectral. Our ghosts take many forms. They appear in social theory. They can be found in the impasse of conquest and exploitation. They manifest in the flood of images. They resonate in the sense of the uncanny that permeate the quotidian. On the other hand, ghosts communicate. They may provide inspiration, cautionary tales, insights, and guidance, giving you hopes to hope, giving you forms to hopes and dreams. The anthropologists of the past are some of our own ghosts, manifesting themselves at times inconveniently with all of their imperfections, when we intone their names. So let me suggest, perhaps, with all respect and affection, William Malm, as a kind of ghostly presence, if you will, that these are hauntings that enshrine many older thoughts and structures, but also enable us to think through and with these modes, hopefully with refreshing ears, or at least that can be our challenge. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. This is amazing. For our UM students, you know that a good talk is just like this, you know. Lots of interesting info, but a lot of sharp questions that makes you think. Now, I have many questions, and I would, but I think I should open the floor to questions that may want to, in the audience would have too. So,
And if anyone wants to ask questions,
Yeah.
I'll bring the mic.
yeah, we will bring the mic if you want to ask questions. So don't be shy because this is your time, a place for you to explore musicology, scholarship, music. So, and she's captured here, we have to explore her. Please go ahead, ask questions.
I have a reflection. So I was just in Barcelona, and I went to a flamenco performance. And flamenco is, it's a resistance movement in south of Spain, and I knew nothing. And I went in and I cried and I laughed. I didn't know the language. I'd never heard any of the music. So is it a universal language? I love the way you posed it. It's the universal heart. The language was completely foreign. The melodies were completely foreign, but the language of sorrow, resistance, frustration, longing was universal. So that was beautiful. Thank you.
No, thank you for this comment. And here's a question for you. How might your tears have erupted if you knew some of the histories of some of those flamenco? Maybe they told you the histories in the program,
I did,
you know? Or knew.
I studied a little bit before I.
But, so you weren't quite unknowing, but still, the notion of universal language or universality is predicated upon so many assumptions, right? Right, so you could say tears are universal, laughter is universal. Okay, I'll buy that. But what might frame those tears? What might frame that laughter? Irony, joy. So there can be many ways in which you frame the expressions that can vastly differ. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Professor
Thank you.
Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Yano, for a wonderful lecture. I was wondering, did Professor Malm think that the bridge would get us there, all the way to the music of the other, or that there will be some limits to it? Did he ever felt that there would be something about music of unfamiliar or other cultures that would be immediately close to?
You mean, did he feel that doing his research, writing his book, he was unveiling the deepest cultural secrets or knowledge of Japan and its music? Is that what you're saying?
Right, so yes, if there's a limit to the extent in which we can get to know or understand the music of other cultures.
Yeah, I would say this, and pardon my French, but Malm was no fool. So he knew that he was providing an introduction. He hoped that the introduction, I believe, was seductive. But he didn't say that he was getting to necessarily the end of a 40-year relationship. You know what marriage is like, and so the bloom of first romance and then what happens after 40 years plus, right? So he wasn't assuming that he was going to get to that. But I do believe that he felt that he was opening the door. Whether that door was entirely truthful, whether that door would have been the same as if a Japanese opened the door, is subject to question and debate. At the same time, he certainly knew his version of America, and he could say at least that part he knew extremely well, so he knew his audience. And I think that was important for him, that he knew his audience. And I don't think necessarily that people who would be opening his book were necessarily expecting to find the deep, the deep cultural heart of Japan and its music.
Whatever that may be.
Right, yeah, whatever that may be, yeah. Thank you. But I think part of this, you know, and I am interested in hearing your thoughts, especially those of musicians who have spent many decades of their lives involved in producing more Japanese music, or maybe composing some of their own. What this encounter, what this encounter means, and why. And maybe that's getting a little too personal, but that's part of what we're talking about, right? Yeah, thank you.
Maybe if it's okay, I'll go next since I have the microphone here.
Sorry.
Maybe it's inevitable, but first, just thank you so much. Like, really amazing to think about so many things. So inspiring to hear some more stories. And to me, you know, the combination of narrative and thought and processing is really profound. So I appreciate it so much. And I'm dizzy with things that I could say, but I guess I would want to ask you, taking that kind of like the spirit of the role modeling, like music isn't a universal language. Neither is a certain creative spirit universal, perhaps. Like what's the thing below yet one level that we can keep looking for, you know? Because I hear like, to me, so much role modeling of like, wow, I want to be like that. And, you know, thinking, this person who grew up in a different time and a different culture, to some degree than I, but like, what are those things that go lower that keep us connected? And maybe it's those things of like building bridges that we know we'll never get there, but if we try and other people try, they come together. So that's not really a question unless you understand it, and maybe you do better than me, but I'm just wondering what is the one thing lower with the kind of like, you know, enthusiasm and joy and a sense of adventure that, you know, we can keep bringing to our world, for those of us who teach, to our students and our colleagues, and how do we not just do the superficial things, but what is that low thing that kind of brings it? So I don't know if that's enough to trigger an interesting response.
Well, I think it's the human spirit, however you define that, and however it might be lived and enacted in an individual's life. I think it's it's the connection that connects me to each one of you in this room in some way or other. I could be misreading the connection. I could be totally wrong about the connection, but at least, so give me my fantasy, give me my fiction. That it's the connection, human to human, that I think is, I don't know if it's above or below, but it's part of it. And can I also say something about the bridge? That it's not as if the bridge doesn't make it all the way, but that we're shaping the bridge as we step across it. And that bridge changes depending on how it's interpreted on each side. So there's a lot of complications to bridging, right? That we can't take for granted. And so, you know, Tuttle's A Bridge Between East and West is a complicated thing. Yeah.
Reminds me a little bit of those ants that make bridges. Like the ants are the bridge, and to some degree we are the bridge when we do these kind of things.
Absolutely.
We're part of the bridge itself.
Yeah. Warts and all.
Along the same lines, you did mention Ruth Benedict. Do you know if he had much interaction with them, or how his ways fit in with, you know, so Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, all these people were so well known and very influential in their time. Do you know if he had much interaction with them?
Did Ruth Benedict have any interaction with Japanese?
No, with Malm.
With Malm? Not that I know of. Not that I know of. Not that I know of. He was writing this in Japan. I don't know if she ever stepped foot in Japan. She wrote her book based upon interviews with Japanese Americans. Yeah, so the Ruth Benedict book has its own history, its own very particular framing, and yes, it is the introduction to Japanese culture that is still used in some Andro classes, but quite a different one. And it was based upon, never having been to Japan, not speaking a word of Japanese. And Ruth Benedict herself, I don't know if you know, but her own history is she was a bit deaf, which made interactions with other people rather difficult. So she liked to rely on writings, and she relied on things that were more nonverbal. Yeah. But Ruth Benedict is a whole other lecture. Oh my gosh, very, very interesting. Maybe you've already had those lectures at CJS. I hope so. Yeah.
Amy and then David.
Well, thank you for that amazing talk. I really hope that I'll be able to read a transcription of that so I can absorb it more effectively. I'm not sure if you were talking about me earlier, but talking about how much I was influenced by Malm and his book and my career. It sounded like you were talking about me.
No, I never interviewed you. But you know, you can impute whatever you like.
Well, I was just thinking that's a pretty amazing, lofty group of people to be mentioned in the same lecture with. So that's an honor. But I wanted to say something that I discovered in Japan is I became very involved in, by the way, I play a Japanese bamboo flute called the shakuhachi. Actually, I'm going to be up on that stage later today, so come on, don't miss the show. Had to do the plug. In Japan, not very many Japanese people know Japanese music. At least not classical Japanese music. So I feel like my role in doing Japanese music, I was doing it in Japan for 20 years, and I'd still be there, except that my wife lives in Boulder, Colorado. It was interesting to be teaching Japanese music to Japanese, performing for Japanese, and many times they didn't know that I wasn't Japanese. And I felt that, yeah, you can get pretty deep, and I wouldn't have gotten as deep without having Professor Malm's book there. It really made a difference. So that was very special. And flamenco, that's interesting. I have a Japanese son-in-law that's a professional flamenco dancer. So lots of different cross-cultural exchanges and experiences at very deep levels can happen. It's amazing how much we can, as humans, experience culture.
And I will say that in competitions, I don't know about flamenco, but in tango and in French bread baking, globally, worldwide competitions, Japanese have won.
Hi, and so I'm curious about Bill's pedagogy as you experienced it back then. So we now have a great, vast variety of materials that we can find very quickly to illustrate music online and things like that, which I'm sure you didn't have. And he did put a lot of effort into teaching people how to sing Nagauta and also preparing stuff to help people understand Japanese theater translation that was key to videotape and things like that. But anyway, in that time, would he perform things for you in class that he didn't have access to as recordings? And also, somewhat related is, what use did he make of comparison to other forms of music, including Western music? People in my field, Chinese theater, of his generation were very fond of comparing to Shakespeare and things like that. So anyway, those two things, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Right. So did Malm perform much? He performed some, the genres that he knew better. By the time I was...
Did he make you guys sing a little bit too?
No.
No?
The most was the Matsuri Bayashi, but that was like a little small performance class. But it's not as if every class you were going, no. He wouldn't do that. But sometimes, he might demonstrate. Yeah. And your other question was about...
How much use did he make of comparison to music he assumed people would be more familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I think comparison comparisons have been part of ethnomusicology.
Of course, yes.
As
But it
anthropology.
can be done in very different ways.
Done in different ways, but that's why he created those aphorisms, so that through those aphorisms it became a process of translation. So translation itself has a comparative aspect built into it, right? So I think to that extent, but he was not, well, I take it back, when he was doing ethnomusicology, he would say, the maqam is like such and such, you know, that kind of comparison. But I think more than that, he wanted to get across what this other stuff was, called Japanese music, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was just amazing. Yes, so appreciative of how you not only organized it, but just put so many different perspectives on it. So I can't help thinking about the conversation you and I had a couple of evenings ago, that you term, you're now exploring this term eldering. And, you know, this event is about celebrating someone who's had this outsized impact on an entire field, not to mention the individual lives he touched. And that his accomplishments are beyond legendary, you know? So it's, I think, entirely appropriate that we're here to celebrate that. And we're all of us are here to witness to that too, okay? Then I think it's interesting too that you're delivering this kind of set of reflections when you yourself have now reached Emerita status. that you know, you bring a whole career's worth of time of thinking about these to bear on then looking at this other career earlier than yours, okay? And then I have to admit, I'm in the same boat, you know, I'm not yet Emerita, but I'm not far from it. And so I'm sort of coming into this, into this space, but I'm far from your amazing ability to reflect so eloquently. But anyway, what I find interesting is that in just approaching this topic and bringing us into this topic, you didn't start from the apogee of his career. You went right back to the beginning, the very beginning. And yet that beginning was a kernel of what in retrospect could easily be called an elderly kind of wisdom about it all. And I'm just curious to wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Amy and I have been, and Joseph, we three have been talking about eldering, and I told them that I'm coming up with this concept of radical eldering, which is not about age, but it inevitably gets tied to age, however you want to do it. But I think that, you know, and so I was actually quite interested, maybe it's who I hang out with. Maybe I hang out with older company, I don't know. but it's also, I mean, think of the AAA call for papers, asking about ghosts, asking about spectral presences, etc. And I thought that it's really interesting. And I'm talking to colleagues, so excuse this kind of retired talk. I'm talking to colleagues who are clearing out their offices and what to do with that stuff. But more importantly, what to do with careers. How to think through careers that started off like graduate students, right? Ready for the inspiration of moms and others. So I guess maybe to a certain extent, naturally, these thoughts are very much part of my everyday thoughts of what we do now that I personally am in a certain phase of life. I think it is a room that I've entered, and I go, oh, I've never been in this. Well, so let me get to know it. How do I deal with it, you know? So I think that, you know, being invited to give this talk and on Malm, although it wasn't necessarily always supposed to be about Malm, as Joseph presented the topic to me, and I gather Gerald Gorman would have done a whole different thing, yeah. But it was I really am thankful because it allowed me to think through what's important here. I think what's important is, as always, to think of the context in which Malm wrote, but I had to start off with celebration, right? Because I think there's lots worth celebrating. At the same time, I thought it was really important, and partly inspired by your talk at UH, Amy, to think through, where do we bring it? How do we bring it to the 21st century? We can't stay in 1959. We wouldn't want to, right? There's a certain amount of violence to 1959. There's celebration, there's creativity, there's all kinds of adventure and passion of 1959. But there is passion and adventure in 2025 as well. It's just very different and should be. These are different kinds of interactions, different kind of interlocutors, and we have to acknowledge the different set of conditions under which we might listen and how that global encounter might occur. And I think it's just, so Amy, my approach, my take on this, I didn't know I was going to do this when I wrote the first paragraph, not at all. Or even when I submitted the abstract to Joseph, it was just like, shh, you know. But I think it was important for me as an individual, and I will be following up with these various strands. And it was important to even contextualize me. And maybe that's how I'm taking this, almost like it's a kind of translation of me. So thank you.
And yet, no matter how removed different people might be from Malm, you know, there are many of us who had the privilege of knowing him, working alongside him, having his friendship. And yet, there's still so much to learn.
I think so, because I think maybe anyone who had interactions with him in this room have a different version of Malm. And so the Malm is always a composite, as is true for all individuals, right? But maybe especially true for one who was such a public person, such a public persona. And this public had this Malm, this public had this Malm, his family had their own Malm, etc. Yeah, so yeah, kind of a Rashomon thing.
Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture. Really enjoyed it. And I really appreciate the fact that you sort of placed Bill Malm and scholars of his era in the historical context of ethnomusicology. I think one of the things that I think we need to remember is the fact that ethnomusicology was not recognized as a real legitimate discipline, if you will, in the 1960s. It was a real struggle for ethnomusicology to gain space in traditional music schools. And so there's people like Bill Malm who stepped to the course and were able to anchor ethnomusicology in music curricula such as University of Michigan. And especially his book, and as I mentioned in my remarks, I read that book as part of my preliminary exams for my degree at University of Minnesota. And considering the fact that that book was written in 1959, and I know you've covered this, it was the only thing available, well, not the only thing, but the only thing that one could read and have sort of this appreciation for, if you will, for Japanese music. And I mean, this is a book I thoroughly enjoyed reading, and I liken it to Kwabena Nketiah's book on the music of Africa. I mean, it's a survey. I mean, this one book is supposed to cover the whole of Africa with, you know, a tremendous number of ethnic groups and musical styles and stylistic tendencies and so on and so forth. And so people like Bill Malm, and I didn't mention that cadre of scholars that included, you mentioned Alan Marion, Bruno Nettle, George List, you know, Kalinsky, McAllister, and it just goes on and on. None of these folks had degrees in ethnomusicology. None of them. And most of the scholars of my generation, we came into ethnomusicology through other means. We didn't have undergraduate degrees, and many of us did not have master's degrees in ethnomusicology. Ethnomusicology was a PhD level academic endeavor. So what you've done here, I think, has really provided the framework for us understanding the history of ethnomusicology through someone like Bill Malm, and I really, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I just ask, because I don't know the history here, I'm asking out of ignorance, but who was the first ethnomusicology hire at U of M? Was it Bill?
Yeah.
And the second was Judy Becker?
Yeah. And Bill was not teaching just ethnomusicology. He was teaching other courses as well. Western music courses.
Oh, Western music courses.
Yeah.
Oh.
Any other questions? If not, I want to ask. No, go ahead, then I want to ask you.
Hi, Professor Yano. Again, my name is Hanong. I'm just a graduate student here. And actually, this is an extended question from Professor Lastermans. So, I mean, as a Koreanist, I also see, you know, Professor Malm's legacy. Actually, a lot of South Korean musicologists cite, you know, Bill Malm's comments on Korean music, and then how it's important to elevate why we need to study traditional Korean music. But often I encounter challenges to talk to scholars interdisciplinary. For example, in area studies, often historians, literature, or politics, like, you know, those kind of scholars get more prioritized. Maybe because of something they think music is very anomaly. And I think, I wonder how you may have intervened, you know, your speech in highlighting orality or, you know, listening culture as why it's important. I just wanted to hear how you have been forging your own path to prioritize the sound based on your, you know, kind of prolific monographs, yeah.
Oh. You know, the turn to sound, as Anna Maria says, orality, I find really exciting just as for personal interest. And so my interests have actually veered more toward language. And so I do have a book that's coming out on speaking English in Hawaii. So thank you for the question. But I just think sound as part of it's such a, what shall I say? It's something that can't be, obviously, it can't be bottled, it can't be touched. It is so ephemeral. It is an art of time, it's a temporal art. And all of those qualities I find extremely interesting, especially when so much of, say, Western world sees art and thinks only visual arts, and the permanence of that. But the impermanence of oral arts, I find extremely, I think it poses its own kind of challenges, but it also poses its own kind of elegance that I personally, and this is a very personal thing, I'm just very interested in. So, and just so in the book that I'm writing on speaking English, I develop a concept called disciplinary listening regimes, and it's about the ear and how the ear becomes central to even citizenship in territorial Hawaii. That's another lecture. Sorry, nothing to do with Malm. But although his ear was fantastic, and he let his ear lead him. His ear and his heart, right? Yeah.
Chris, we're almost time. I want to ask you a question. I mean, thank you for a wonderful talk with so much wonderful anecdotal, good information. But actually, your paper is actually extremely theoretical, and it's extremely challenging. So, and there are many levels to ask you questions, to wrestle with the points. But one thing I find is a way also to kind of conclude this talk. To me, you are almost challenging us to revisit the whole idea of ethnomusicology of scholarship. Because you see, you can say that the way I'm getting elderly in that sense, that's why I have nostalgic things, that we are looking for Malm's model when we encounter exotic music with enthusiasm, with naivete, with curiosity. But since the 50s, we as musicologists, we've been doing so much ology, but not music. So we've been always focusing on critical theory and things. So we've almost have forgotten the excitement of music, the love of music, and that's what makes us listen and hear. So I'm asking, are you making us to rethink or go back to model? Of course, not do exactly what Malm did, because there's no way, but you're almost challenging us to go back to a more hearty, more human way of looking at music, rather than, well, this music, we can use all this sociological analysis and all the data, archival study. That to me is so much ology, but no music, or no human. So are you really challenging us that, because you see, and I can also see, because you've been president of 2 associations, major associations, and in that role, you really have to look at the field and care about the future and the back of the field. So that's why when your challenge coming from you is about, to me, is very serious. So are you challenging us that way too? And once go back, look back at your big masters and learn something. Are you doing that?
Am I?
I think so.
Am I? Oops. I think yes, sure. And I think what, to me, since 2020, we have all been living through trauma. And I think in the processes of living through trauma, and 2020 is when I became president of the Association for Asian Studies, and everything kind of caved in, as you'll recall what 2020 was like. Do we ever hug again? Only at your peril. So it was an era of disconnection. And I think that in perhaps what I'm thinking through is, how might we connect? How might we accept the sensual? How might we accept passion and say, it's okay, it's legitimate? And how might we accept listening with our hearts?
Yes.
And suggest that it's not only possible, but is actually quite necessary to keep us human. Because we've gone through the very recent trauma of avoiding our humanity and negating our humanity. So, but you said that, not me.
No, I think that we can, I'll just stop there, because that is, to me, today we seem to have a heart-to-heart conversation, and that's what the best scholarship in my mind. The best scholarship tickles the mind, but also the heart. So maybe one big applause for. Thank you, everyone. So right after this, we have a pre-concert discussion and talk. And today, in the evening, of course, we have a wonderfully programmed concert of Japanese music, from something very traditional and something quite fast-forward looking. So I hope to see you all too today. Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you.